Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to create a Power BI report from scratch. The report that we'll be trying to create today looks like this, and it's actually a report that I've been creating as part of a session that I've been doing for people who have been furloughed or laid off as a result of COVID-19. And the reason we're doing this is because I wanted to show you how easy it is to work with Power BI, to learn Power BI, and therefore add one more skill to your toolkit that you can then use to attend interviews. And because it's reporting, it's pretty much guaranteed that it'll be used, or it'll be a skill that is useful in any industry for that matter. And once you know how you can create Power BI, the rest of it is left up to you to use your ingenuity and understanding of the business to figure out how you want to implement it. Now, on the off chance that you still feel like as if this is not something that you might find useful, the report that we are going to create today is actually something related to a bank statement. So it's something that you could personally use. What we're going to do is we're going to use a CSV file of a bank statement, or something that looks like a bank statement, and we're going to import it into Power BI, and we're going to analyze our income and expenses and things like that. So as you can see here, it's got quite a few pieces of information. Now this video is going to be a bit off the cuff because it's a fairly long video and there's no real script associated with it. So you'll find me doing a lot of stuff that might not make sense immediately, but it all comes together at the end. So please feel free to just watch the entire video, and at the end of it we'll have something that looks like this. So I'm going to assume in this case that there is absolutely no background in terms of what Power BI is. You're not a developer, you don't have any coding experience. For all intents and purposes, you could be just a student, and you're just learning the tool. And that's the level at which I'll be doing this. So I'll be showing a lot of the steps pretty much in detail, so you know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. And again, I'm doing this from scratch, so bear with me while I click all the buttons. There might be some delay, there might be some lag, but at the end of it we should be fine. It shouldn't take too long to implement it, and that's one of the big features of Power BI, that it's very easy to get started, very easy to do some basic reporting right off the bat. Now the first thing obviously is you need to download Power BI. So I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to say download Power BI desktop, and I'm going to click on the first link, which is the Power BI official site, and in there you will have Microsoft Power BI desktop, and when you click advanced download options, you will get the download button here. When you click on the download button, you'll see that there's a 64-bit and a 32-bit. You want the 64-bit because that's the latest version. It supports more memory, and therefore you'll find it useful. When you press next, it starts the download. I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to press next. I'm just going to go ahead and start the installation procedure. It might take a few seconds while it installs. I already have the latest version, so it's really not that big a deal, but it's a one-click install, so you shouldn't really have any trouble installing Power BI. Now when you're done with it, what's going to happen is you're going to have something that looks like this. Now I'm recording this video, so my laptop is pretty much on the edge of what it can do, so I'm going to go ahead and just cancel out of this for now. You can see it's preparing to install. It's already started, so I'm just going to close off some of these things that is going on in the background. Just a second. While that's happening, I'll go ahead and show you the data that we'll be working off today. And this is again just a sample file, so it's not really something that contains any real data. The numbers might not always reflect what might look like a real world scenario in terms of the categorization of the expenses and stuff, but the idea is that this much is pretty much guaranteed to be there in all bank statements. So what you'll typically find is you'll have some kind of header information about your account number, the name of the account holder, etc. And you'll also find that we typically have columns like date and the number of debits and credits on a particular date, and some kind of categorization, typically some description in terms of what that transaction was about. So I've also gone ahead and added an ID column here. You don't typically find this in your bank statement, but I just went ahead and added it because it kind of felt a little bit empty when I was doing this. So you typically have some kind of header information, then you have the real transaction details that we use. You'll also typically find some kind of closing bank statement, but we don't need that. We'll be calculating that on our own, and maybe occasionally you might find some kind of footer information as well. The good thing is usually these header and footer information are static, so if you know how many rows they occupy, you will have an idea about how to get rid of them. So this is the data that we'll be working off. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave that there for the time being. As you can see here, my Power BI is installing at the moment. So this is the latest version that's currently available. Just give it a minute. So while that's happening, I'm going to give you an idea about what we will be doing for the rest of the video. What we're going to do is, first we're going to import the CSV file into Power BI. Then we're going to have to clean up some of the data, like remove some of the headers and footers, etc. We'll also need to go ahead and make sure that there are no null values so that we can do calculations on the columns like debit and credit. We'll be adding a date table so that we can do some kind of time series analytics, such as how many transactions did I do this month as opposed to last month, or what is the total debits and credits for the current month compared to the previous month. Some kind of progression in terms of are things getting better or are they getting worse, categorization, things like that. And once you do that, we'll basically just play around a little bit with the data, see if we can do some fun analytics on top of that. So once we import the data and clean it up, we'll be adding a date table, and we'll be connecting the date table with the main transaction table, so that there's a relationship and it understands the data from a time perspective. We'll also be adding some calculated measures or DAX queries, so that we can actually calculate things like the closing balance and the percentage improvement in terms of savings, for example. So once you do that, the rest of it is just the look and feel of the report, which is actually something that you can play around on your own. It's not something that really needs a lot of explanation, but I'll show you some common things that you might want to do. And last but not least, we'll be looking at a tooltip, so that you know how to create a tooltip to get further details without actually having to create another report on top of what you've done so far. So that's pretty much what we have lined up for today. This is going to be a slightly longer video than what I normally do, so bear with me while we go ahead and do that. Okay, so that's done. Now the first thing we want to do is we want to launch Power BI. So you'll have an icon like this somewhere in your desktop. You want to click on that and open it up. Now my system is recording this video as well as having a couple of other things running in the background, so it's going to be a little slower than normal, so bear with me while we deal with that. Right now Power BI is launching, so we just want to give it a minute. You can see when Power BI launches, it actually eats up a significant amount of memory and CPU while it's starting. It's got a lot of things to load. Okay, and when it's done, you should be seeing a screen like this. You might get a pop-up, but that's okay. You don't need to worry about that. Cool. So this is the Power BI desktop application which we'll be using to load our data into and do the Power BI report. So the first thing you want to do is you want to click get data and then choose text CSV. And when you do that, you need to navigate to your desktop or wherever you have saved the CSV file. Select your CSV file and press open. And what it's going to do is it's going to read the CSV file and understand the contents of the CSV file and load it into the database for you and load it into Power BI for you. Just give it a second while it does that. Just a second. And as you can see here, we've got the data. You'll see that I've got some header information, and obviously the footer is there, but it's towards the bottom. So I want to clean this up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click transform data. And you'll get into the Power Query editor, as you can see on the top. And this is a place where you can clean up your raw data and prepare it for consumption in the report. Now, if you look over here, what I've got is I've got 5 rows on the header that I want to remove. So I'm just going to go ahead, click remove rows, and you'll see that there's an option on the top that says remove top rows. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to say remove the top 5 rows. So there we go. That takes care of that. But we've got the first row, which is the header or the details of the column description. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to say use first row as headers. And now you'll see that instead of column 1, column 2, column 3, I've got transaction ID, transaction date, description, credits, and debits. Also, you'll see that if I scroll down further, I will have the footer information, which is basically the reward points or something like that. It could be anything for that matter. We don't necessarily have an idea what it could be, but if you know what it is, it's always good to investigate the CSV file, get an idea about what it is. So you'll see I've got like 2 rows over here. So I'm going to say remove bottom, and I'm going to say that remove the 2 rows at the bottom of the file. And that's something that's probably going to be static. So you'll see that once you do it, the steps that you're doing is getting logged over here, and you can undo a step by just clicking the X next to it. So at this point we've got somewhat clean data, but I still have a couple of issues here with null values, as you can see here. So I want to replace them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the column, right click on it, and you'll see that I've got something called replace values. And I'm going to say replace the null with a 0. I'm going to do that for my debits as well. So I'm going to right click debits, and I'm going to replace values, and I'm going to say replace null with 0. Great. So now that we have that, the next thing I want to do is I want to just go ahead and press close and apply over here. And what that does is that all the changes I've done so far are now being persisted, they're being implemented. So all this data is being stored in the memory, in the RAM. So while it's being loaded into the RAM, these calculations, these changes that I've been implementing, that I've performed, are being implemented on the data in the RAM. And that makes it available here, as you can see in the Power Pivot screen, which is basically called data over here. And you'll see that my data is now available, and I've got some information. The first thing I want to do is I want to click credits now, and I want to create a measure. A measure is basically nothing but a calculation that I want to use. So I'm going to click home, and I'm going to say a quick measure, and the quick measure is basically just going to be a sum. Correct? It's going to be an addition basically. So if I scroll down over here under mathematical operations, I've got sum. I'm just going to click that, and I'm going to say credits. Yeah, sum of credits. Yeah. Another way you can do this is by just clicking new measure, and you can simply say debits, total debits, sum of debit. You can see that the IntelliSense automatically understands which column I'm talking about and selects the table name, column name over here. Right. So you'll see that when I do that, you'll have like these calculator symbols over here, right? So I just need the sum of credits, so I don't need to worry about this part. Just a second, let me just clean this up a little bit. Correct. So I've got a formula here which basically tells me that when I use this column, it's supposed to calculate the sum of all the values in the credit, and this one is going to do sum of all the values in the debit. So you'll see that the formula is different. Correct. But now that I have that, I can immediately come into the visualization screen over here, choose a pie chart, and just add these two columns. And as soon as I do that, you'll see I've got information about my debits and credits right now. So I could just rename this over here by clicking title to something like total breakup. Right. If you look at the previous report, the template that I'll be using, or the kind of report that I want to create, it's actually a different color scheme, a different color palette compared to what we have. So you can see here that I'm basically doing this screen here. So I want to maybe go into view, and you'll see that we've got some predefined templates here, and I'll just choose the dark theme. Maybe bring this down a little bit because I want some header information on the top. Correct. So there we go. That's the first one. Let's see if we can do some other screens as well here. So you'll see that I've got like some other details, but if you look here, I've got expense breakup, which is going to be a tile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to my report over here, and you'll see that I've got the tree map, and I'm going to choose from the left hand side under fields the transaction description, and then I'm going to choose debits, and I'm going to say that if I look over here, you can see that I've got a breakup of my debits and credits, debits basically for the categorization based on which I am doing my spending. So this gives me an idea about where I spend most of my money, and as you can see here, it shows it as home loan. So I'm just gonna say it's a breakup by description, right? I could also go ahead and insert a card, as you can see here, and the card will show me the total debit and credit. So as you can see here, we've got the total credits. I could simply copy paste that one more time and call it debits. So I'll click here and I'll say debits. There we go. I might also want to find out how much balance I have after subtracting my total credits from debits. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back into the Power Pivot, and I'm going to add a new measure, as you can see here. And when I click new measure, I'm just going to call this balance, which is basically the closing balance, right? So let's say balance over here, and I already have total credits and I already have total debits. So subtract the two and I will have my balance. So I'm just going to create another copy of this right here, and this time I'm just going to call it, I'm going to get rid of this guy here, and I'm just going to put balance here, and there we go. That gives me my balance. Let's call it balance. Oops, just a second. All right, so we already have these three. So you can see that just by doing this much, our report is pretty much close to what it was, correct, over here. So I might want to go ahead and add some kind of filter, which I'm going to do later. So the next thing is we need a date so that we can analyze this data by date. So we don't have a calendar right now over here, but we need a calendar because otherwise our charts and graphs will have gaps in them, right? And we don't want gaps. So if there is a day when you have not spent any money, you want the arrow in the graph to come all the way down to the x-axis. And to do things like that, you need the calendar table. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here into the table tools. I'm going to say new table, and I'm just going to call this table calendar, and I'm going to say calendar and you can see it's asking for a start date. So I'm going to say the start date is 2019, 1st of January, and the end date is going to be 2024, 31st of December, correct? It depends on what date range you're looking for, but for now I'm going to be basically doing this. So I've got my dates here, but you can see that this is pretty much useless to me. So what I need to do next is I need to add a new column. So I'm going to click new column on the top, and I'm going to say the new column is going to be, oops, just a second. Is going to extract the year from the calendar table and the date column, and I'm going to call this guy year. And I'm going to repeat this step for the month, the day, the week, just so that I can do the analytics, a time series analytics on any kind of granularity that I want. So I'm going to put month over here next, and I'm going to say get the month from the calendar table. You'll notice that most of these formulas are very similar to the formulas that you use in Excel, and there's a reason for that, and the reason is because Power BI is meant to be a self-service BI tool, and a lot of the functionality is based on the assumption that the people who are using Power BI might not be technically very savvy, and they only have a very basic level of comfort with a tool similar to Excel, and that's kind of why all the formulas and stuff pretty much have a lot of similarity with Excel. Having said that, there are a lot of additional functionality that have nothing to do with Excel, so more advanced, powerful stuff typically happens using other formulas and methods that you don't find in Excel. Okay, so we got the year and the month and the day. I'm just going to add, now the month is in, as you can see, a number format, but that's not really something that we might be interested in. We might want to see it in terms of January, February, March. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say format, and I'm going to say the date, and I'm going to say that I want the month. So I'm just going to put 3 M's over there, and I'm going to call this guy month name. And you can see now we've got January, February, March, etc., and that's good. And you could do the same thing for day as well. So you could simply add a new column so that you can understand your spending habits on a weekday versus a weekend, which is something that you might actually get some useful information out of. So let's go ahead and do that as well. You can go ahead and do week as well, so I'm going to leave that to you to figure out on your own. So that's what we have there. Now the thing is, we have a calendar at the moment, but we need to establish a relationship between our calendar and the data that we have. So if you look over here in the model screen, you'll have the 2 tables that we have right now, and what we want to do is we want to tell Power BI how the data between these 2 tables are related. So if you look in our raw data, we've got transaction date, and then we've got the date column inside the calendar. I'm going to drag transaction date from there into the calendar, and it'll understand how their data is related. So you can see that every one row in the calendar table can have 1 or more rows in the Power BI table. Now that relationship being established, we need to go back into data. And when we go back into data, we choose the calendar table on the right hand side, and you'll see that we need to tell Power BI that this table is the date table, and all analytics in terms of which day comes ahead of the other, which is the financial year, or which is the parallel year, which is the current year versus the previous year. All that information needs to be calculated based on the data coming from this table. So we go ahead and select mark as date table, and we choose the date column, which is the first column that we created. The prerequisite for this is that the dates have to be a continuous sequence. There cannot be gaps in the date. So now that we have that, we've got a calendar that we can use. So the next question is, how can we do some additional analytics on top of this data? So I'll come back into Power BI and I'll do a calculation over here. So I'm going to say new measure, and in my new measure I'm going to say something like calculate the sum of debits correct? But filter it for the same period, and then in the calendar table look up the date, right? I'm saying for the same period last year, correct? So what happens here is that if I choose a month, it's going to see what is the value for the corresponding month the previous year, correct? So once that's done, I'm going to call this measure debits last year. Right, so now that we have that, what I can do is I can come back into Power BI over here and I can actually do a comparison. So the first thing I want to probably do in this case is I want to go ahead and use an area chart, and I'm going to put the year from the calendar table because that's the table that contains the year information, and I can put my current debits as well as my debits from last year, right? So you can see that it's all showing up under values right now. So I'm going to shift year to the x-axis, and when I do that, you'll see that now we've got a breakup in terms of what my debits look like compared to the previous year. If you want to validate this information, what you can do is you can just select this graph over here and convert it into a table. And when you do that, you'll see that my debits last year, so if you look over here, this data is right now ordered by the year. So in 2020, my debits was 1,019,076, and that same value you'll see on the right hand side where it says debits last year. In 2021, it was 1,090,000, and that shows up here. So the good thing is now I have an idea about how my debits are actually being calculated. So I've got one value which shows me the current year's debit and the other one which shows me the previous year's debit, and I can just simply go ahead and make it a graph. And as long as the last year debits, as the current year debits are lower than last year debits, I know I'm doing a good job of controlling my expenses, right? So that, I'm just going to go ahead and leave that here. You'll also remember that we had balance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put in this bar graph over here, and in my bar graph I'm going to put the balance, and I'm going to break up the balance by month. And when I do that, what you'll see is if the balance is less, if I spent more than I earned, you'll find that information here. So I'm going to just go ahead and sort this data by month name, and you'll see that it's actually a bit messed up because it's not showing it in the actual sequence of the date. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into calendar over here. I'm going to select calendar, I'm going to select month name over here, and when I choose month name, I'm going to say sort the month name not alphabetically but by the number of the month. So you'll see that I come over here and I click the number, the month column as the column on which to sort the data. So now what happens is if I come back here, you'll see that my data is sorted in terms of the month, and you can see I did spend a lot more money than I earned in January, and the same thing happened in September, but I'm doing a fairly good job of saving some money for the rest of the year. Correct. So that's that part there, and you'll see that it is slowly coming together. We can see that we've got most of the stuff already figured out. So the next thing is I need to go ahead and put in a filter so I can specify the year that I'm looking for. So one thing you could do here is, if you look, we've got a slicer. I'm going to select a slicer. Oops. Let me just click out somewhere first. Okay, and I'm going to just add a new slicer here. And in the slicer, I'm just going to go ahead and put the, I guess I could put the year. It's up to you what you want to put over there. So I can kind of like compare just 2019 or 2020 data, right? And when I move it around, what's going to happen is it's going to basically recalculate stuff. So you'll see that my graph over here has changed now. It's only comparing 2019 with 2021. But if I shift it to 2022, you'll see that the rest of the graph automatically changes. And this way I can actually use the slicer to figure out my expenses on a yearly basis. You could do it even for monthly, etc. There are other ways that you could do it. So the choice is up to you in terms of how you want to implement a filter. You could also implement a filter by just dragging it here into the filter pane and hard coding a value saying this report is only supposed to show 2019 data, etc. I can go ahead and just call this guy dashboard at this point. And now that that's done, the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and try and do a cumulative understanding. So I want to try and see how my expenses progress over the year. Correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and I'm going to create a new formula. I'll call it just a second. I'm going to add a new measure. Just give it a second. And I'm going to say year till date, total year till date, and year till date what? Sum of debits, correct? And just a second, it needs to know the date table, so I'm going to go ahead and say from the calendar table take the date. I'm not going to put anything else for the rest of it. I'm just going to call this YTD debits. And now that I have that, I can create an area chart again and just plug in my YTD debits and the year. Just a second. Actually, not the year, I guess month would be a better value to put in. Correct. So you'll see that this is my year till date debits. I could potentially just do the same thing for my credits as well, so I could just simply come here and add a new measure. And measure is basically nothing but a calculation that's being applied on a set of rows. So I could just say YTD total, total you can see we've got options like month till date, quarter till date, but I'm interested in year till date, so I could say sum of credits. I can choose my calendar table again. I can say YTD credits. So now I have a new column called YTD credits, which I'm going to go ahead and put it into the same bar graph that we have here. Not bar graph, the area chart that we have here. Correct. Okay. Yeah, well, my year-to-date credits is throwing, it's a bit weird, so let me see what's going on. Sum of credits. Okay. Probably because there's not really all that much gap between the two of them. Let me see if 2020 and 2020, because I've not populated this data perfectly, so there's a good chance that I don't have any debits or I don't have any credits for some years. So there we go. So you can see that if I look at just 2020 data, you'll see that I've got a lot more credits to my account than debits. Not by much, but definitely, at least when you look at the graph, you can see that I am saving much more than I am spending, and that's a good thing. Gives me an idea about whether I'm actually keeping a tight grip of my finances or whether they're slowly slipping out of my hand. Right. Okay, and that basically brings us to this screen over here. So we've got pretty much these guys here. The only thing left is this guy at the bottom, which is nothing but the total debits and credits. So let me just go ahead and do that really quick. So that's going to be my debits and my credits broken down by month. And I guess I need it side by side, so I'm going to go ahead and do it like this as a clustered column chart. And as you can see, that's pretty much it. That's my finances. You'll see that this didn't really take all that long. It's a fairly easy way to create a report. Most of the information we want is available, so I have an idea about how my spending patterns are, and you can do the same thing. That's kind of the point of this video, that learning Power BI and using it is so easy that it literally just takes you a few hours, and hopefully this video has convinced you about that part. Now the next thing I wanted to show you was a tooltip, and that's pretty much the last thing I wanted to show. So a simple example would be like when you come into something like this, you want to see exactly what happened, right? So if for example I see that I lost a lot of money in June, September and January, I might want to try and understand what happened on those months. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, create a new page. I'm going to call it tooltip, and in the tooltip I'm going to add a table, and in the table I'm going to add a description and followed by the total debits to give me an idea about exactly where I spend my money. Okay, so let me just go ahead and adjust it over here. Great, so it gives me an idea about what's going on. Maybe I want to show it only for the top 10 items so that I don't have too much information, because the tooltip is again not really the whole thing, it's supposed to be a subset, correct? So just give me a second. I'm going to go into the description over here, and I'm going to say the top N. I'm going to say the top 5 by the debit amount, correct? So the top 5 items which have the highest debit amounts, that's what it's going to show me. But this is a whole report. I don't want to see it as a whole report. I want to see it as a tooltip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this is a tooltip by clicking on tooltip over here. All right, I'm going to click in the background over here, and I'm going to say just a second, the page size is a tooltip, and you'll see that it shows up like this, correct? So now that it shows up like that, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and tell Power BI that this is a tooltip page. So the next report, I'll come into the dashboard over here, and in the dashboard I'm going to click on, say, this visualization, this graph, and I'm going to click on the format option here, and you'll see that when I click tooltip over here, it's showing me that the tooltip is basically a report page, and I'm going to say tooltip over here, which is the page that we created here. So I'm saying that if I choose to view a tooltip, you need to fetch the information coming from a page called tooltip over here. So now that we have done that, if I just hover over January, you'll see that I can see a pop-up that shows up the description or the breakup of the things that consume a lot of my debits, or basically the stuff that I spent a lot of my money on. And that's pretty much it. The rest of it is fairly straightforward. You could probably insert a text box on the top, and I'll just call it like finance dashboard, something like that. Again, this is just cosmetics, not really related to what we're doing, so it's completely up to you how you want to visualize it, how you want to show it. But that's pretty much it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This kind of is just a quick demonstration of what Power BI can do for you using a very basic CSV file that you load into Power BI and create your visualization and your dashboards. So that's pretty much it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. This is a fairly longer video than I normally create, but as you can see, it's a pretty powerful presentation in terms of the capabilities of Power BI, and I really hope that you will implement it, use it, because the first thing to make money is to save money, and this, I think, definitely will help you understand your finances and figure out areas where you can start saving money. And I hope you're staying safe, and thank you for watching.